Hey guys, it is Mr. Dave with the Ray Kitty Creation Workshop, and you are watching the Ray Kitty Science Project. Thanks for checking us out. We've had some fun programs. If you haven't seen any of our past ones, make sure you check those out because today we're going to be using some of those concepts in talking about friction. Okay, so friction is a part of the way that things work with each other. Okay, friction is a force. Okay, so friction is one of the ways that, like, first off, when you ask a bunch of kids, hey, what is friction? They'll go like this and they'll start rubbing their hands together. And yes, they are correct. Okay, so a good way to show an example of friction is to take your hands and rub them together. Okay, when you're rubbing your hands together, you'll notice maybe now that it's kind of finally getting chilly outside, you will notice that you generate heat. Okay, so this force can generate an energy. That energy is heat. Okay, so when you're rubbing your hands together like that, you begin to generate heat. Okay, now that's pretty important because we use that in a lot of different ways. Okay, you can also use friction to generate electricity. Okay, you have static electricity that is generated by friction, right? Moving those electrons around. When you're doing this, you are causing those electrons and those atoms to have a little bit more action, so they're moving around that way. So friction, that force, can generate an energy. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some little experiments and things. Some of these you can do at home. Other ones you can do at home if you have a crazy microscope like this. Or what is super cool is nowadays, okay, not like way back in the Stone Ages when I was a kid, a microscope was an expensive thing. Okay, but now if you go to your big block stores or your toy stores, things like that, you can pick up a microscope, maybe not one like this, but you can buy an inexpensive microscope, okay? And you may say, oh, well, this is just a piece of plastic. This is a plastic toy. The plastic toys that they have nowadays are excellent, okay? Now, maybe you're not going to quite get the fidelity and you won't have a screen and all those kind of things like these ones have, but just to pick up a cheap microscope, you can get one. I was at a store just the other day. They had them on the Black Friday sale for $29. You can pick up a microscope and some slides. We're going to be using microscopes today. They're a wonderful tool, and they can be a very inexpensive tool. So don't think just because something looks like a cheap toy that you're not going to get wonderful results. Even an inexpensive microscope, if you can afford one or you can chip in with some family and friends, can give you wonderful results. Okay, so if you've got the cash, go out and buy a microscope, even an inexpensive one. Okay, now these ones here, of course, have got a little bit more that we're going to be using today, and they will zoom in a little, maybe a little bit further, or they have the screen, that kind of stuff. So we're going to be showing some stuff about friction because friction, one of the main things that can change friction or change the amount of friction that something has is the texture. Okay, so if you change the texture or you change the roughness of something, then you can increase the friction. Okay, so if you have your hands and you have them together like this and you're rubbing them together, if you're barely touching them, right, you don't have a whole lot of friction because there's not a lot of pressure pushing your two materials together. Okay, this is a solid and this is a solid. Now, if you separate them and you rub them together, is there still friction there? Yes. Okay, now maybe not solid against a solid, but there is still a friction against the air, right? And that's why we have, like, oh, the thing was coming in for re-entry and it was burning up on re-entry as it enters the atmosphere. That's because that heat is the same as this heat right here, just on a way larger scale, right? Or you have sometimes like if you're they say in the Boy Scouts, you'll start a fire with a stick and stuff. They say be prepared. You have to do a stick, you're going to be working at it a long time, okay? So because even if you have that friction and you are rubbing it together like that, it is very difficult to actually get that heat, enough heat to actually generate fire, right? Because I'm rubbing my fingers together pretty hard and I am generating a little bit of smoke there, but this is actually a gimmick, okay? What I'm doing here, on my fingers is actually the oil that they use on the strike pads for matches. There's an oil on there. And that oil, actually, when you get that oil on your fingers, you can have magical smoking fingers, okay? And the same thing is happening. That friction is actually moving those little particles around, and as it is, it's heating them up. And so it's real smoke, but the smoke that's there isn't generated from any amount of fire, really. There's just a little bit of heat. It doesn't even feel any warmer on my fingers, okay? So starting the fire with a stick is more of a, you can do it, but try other ways, okay? So we're going to get into ways that you can work with maybe some of your younger students and even the older students. I was doing these experiments with high school students. If you do want to scale this one up, just do your data collection a little bit higher, okay? If you want to do this with little kids, then, hey, look, see how far the car rolls, and that's fun too, okay? So what we're going to do in order to kind of measure the friction of some of these different objects is what I have is a ramp, okay? Whee! Now, my ramp here is just a little dollar store whiteboard, right? And my dollar store whiteboard will work to measure the amount of friction that some of these different objects have. Now remember, our different objects, we have different like amounts of roughness, okay, the texture versus very smooth. And we will see how that texture difference changes the amount of friction. Now the other thing is, if I were to weigh 2 pounds, okay, maybe I weighed that before Thanksgiving, but now I'm 200 pounds. But if something is very light, it's just the same as when you were barely touching your fingers. If something is very light, there is a low level of friction because there's not a lot of pressure there. The gravity is very low. Okay, so the weight is low, and so we are not going to get a whole lot of movement out of that because our friction is a lot lower because of how much it is making contact, okay? So if you have your little ramp, okay, this ramp can be the back of a notebook. This ramp could be a book. This could be all kinds of things, anything that you can find that's relatively flat, okay? Now, when we say ramp, we usually think of something that you're going to go flying off of, but in this case, it is going to be our starting point, okay? Now, we're going to be measuring what is called static friction, okay? Now, static friction means the friction of something that is not moving, okay? Static just means it's not moving. So we're going to have the friction of something not moving, and we're going to see how much the gravity has to take hold before we can get it to move, okay? Now, I have here, this is a dollar store tape measure, okay? Nothing fancy, this is just a dollar store tape measure. We can use this one in this demonstration. If you don't have a tape measure or a ruler at home, you can get one for $1.25, okay? So we're going to, before we measure our rolling friction, we're going to measure our static friction. And we're going to compare a couple different objects, okay? I have a block, a little block, or a domino, okay? I have a domino. I have a little Mach-E Mustang, okay? And I have a Lego tire, and I have a Lego rim, okay? So we're going to put all of these items onto our ramp, okay? Now, right now, the gravity is pushing straight down, okay? So we're going to want to change that gravity to pull them forward. And the way to do that would be to raise up one side. Okay, so we've gone from a flat plane to an inclined plane. Okay, now our inclined plane is how we are going to see which one has the strongest static friction. Okay, static friction means to stay where it's at. Okay, now these all have different types of friction that work in different ways. The car has got friction on the axles, right, and it's got a little bit of rolling friction. The block has got a lot of friction because it's making a lot of contact. Now you'll notice when you're doing this one, if you're doing it at home, right now I have all of these in what would be considered the proper way, right? My wheel is standing up to where it can roll. My car can roll forward, meaning it's not Marvel style, like trying to slide on the roof. It's actually rolling on the wheels. My block is a block. and this one here is going to roll this way. Now make sure your pom-pom is not upside down, okay? I'm just kidding. You can't really get a pom-pom upside down. So when we're rolling this, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up one edge, and we're going to notice which one has the least, okay? Now, if you're watching this at home, now's a good time to make a guess as to which one you think will roll the least. Now, if you are taking measurements, as you want to do this as a little bit higher science, you can write down a grid and say, I vote the pom-pom will roll first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and you can work it that way. Anytime you're doing an experiment, in order to get better data, make sure you do it more than once, okay? Now here we're just going to do it once just to kind of show you what's up, but I would do this 3 or 4 times to see what your average is. Okay, so which one do you think has got the higher static friction? Okay, now of course I've been doing this one in classes like all week long, so I have a pretty good idea, but we'll see how they move. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up one end and they're going to begin to roll. Okay, and we're going to go from a static friction to a rolling friction. Okay, so we're going to see which one moves first or has the least static friction. So as I go, we can see that our wheels are going pretty well, right? My little Mustang went pretty well. What we've got left here is we've got this block and this pom-pom. The pom-pom went, and now the block, okay? So first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, okay? So in our little race to defeat static friction, we saw that our rolly ones, which had the least point of contact, went first, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to quickly change something about that. Now we are going to put the car Marvel style. We are going to have the block. We are going to have the pom-pom. And I want you to lay down your tires. Now these are just Lego wheels, so you don't have to have anything fancy for that. You can use anything that's round, but we're laying them down. So now they have the same gravity. They all have the same weight. Okay, so the weight is not going to be as much of an object because now we're comparing different amounts of friction. So even though we know what went first last time, what do you think is going to go first this time? We have our different objects in a different orientation with the same gravity. So we're going to do the same test. We're going to pick this up here. We're going to see which one goes first. I've got some guesses. Let's see. So they've lasted, as you can see, a lot longer than last time. Our wheel and our block, our pom-pom, then our car. That tire has got a lot of friction. Now there's a reason for that. You would want a tire to have a lot of friction. Now normally you don't drive around on the side of your tires unless you have a flying DeLorean, but this thing right here, this tire is made out of rubber. Okay? Now rubber has got a high friction coefficient. So the friction in rubber is very high. So we're able to drive cars because we've got the little bumps in our tires, right? Unless you say, your tire is too bald. Now, if you hear that your tire is too bald, that does not mean we're talking something like this up here, except that means we're talking something like this up here. Okay? Bald means not a lot of bumps on it. Luckily, my Nugget doesn't have too many bumps on it. But when your tire has got all those ridges and bumps on it, what happens is that increases the roughness of the surface, so it increases the traction. Okay? Now that's very important because what we're going to do is we're going to take some of these objects and we're going to look at them a little bit closer to see that traction. Okay? Now, as I'm doing that, I want to show you something else that has got some traction. Something else that has traction is my finger. Okay? If you look at your hands, my hands are terribly beat up, but if you look at your hands, you will notice that you have fingerprints, okay? Now, fingerprints are not only so the FBI can say you're the one that did or did not do it, okay? Our fingerprints provide traction, okay? That roughness in our fingerprints is what allows us to have a little more tactile, able to pick things up. The roughness provides friction, okay? Now, if you've ever been in the bathtub or in the pool entirely too long, around my house we call it pruny, when your fingers get all pruny, right? So if your fingers get all pruny, where they're extra bumpy, the reason that happens is friction, Okay? Because now you have a lot more texture on your fingers, and that allows your nice wet fingers to pick up whatever it is that you dropped in the bottom of the pool to see if you could get it before your friends could, or to allow your feet to not be as slippery on the bottom of whatever the surface is. Okay? So that bumpy, next time you're too wet and you see that your fingers have got all the wrinkles in them, you'll know that that is for extra friction, right? So it works just like the bumps on a tire. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come over to this microscope over here, and we're going to look at some of these items under the microscope. This microscope on this side is not quite as powerful as this one because we want to look at them in different sizes, right, or different magnification in order to see some of the differences in the texture. Okay, so first we're going to look at the little bumps on our tire. Okay. So I'm going to put my tire underneath the microscope here, and if we look on that edge, we can see, let me dial it in, whoop, we can see all of those little ridges along the edge of that tire. That's just like on your tire on your car. All of those little bumps are what allow us to have traction when we're driving, especially in water or water on the road or sand, things like that. Now, if you had a very smooth tire, or if you were trying to roll around on your rim, like if you were in some kind of chase scene in a movie or something like that, trying to roll around on your rim, you'll see that there's not too much traction there, right? There's not a lot providing friction, okay? Now, these tires here on our little Matchbox car are plastic, so they're very, there's not a lot of friction there, and they are very smooth, okay? So I'll move my light to where we can see them there. Yeah, they're very smooth. We've got a little bit of texture around the outside, but not too much, okay? Now, our pom-pom, though, when we get to our pom-pom, you can see that that pom-pom, even though it was very light, it ended up moving last when it was against the other rolling or round objects, and that's because look at all that texture. It looks like maybe a troll's hair from the Troll movie or a cactus, something like that. This squishy little pom-pom has actually got a lot of traction, okay, because it has that very rough surface, okay? Now, with that rough surface, we're going to go over to our a little bit more detailed microscope. This one zooms in a little bit further than our other one. And we're going to look at some of these materials under this microscope. Now, I have a lot on my table here today to check out all of these different things. But when we're looking at these items, we're going to look at the same types of materials, but we're going to look at a different version of them. This is rubber or fun foam, okay? So this type of material is one that you would use at our house for making all kinds of crafts, but it is that rubber, just like that tire, and you can see that it is actually very rough, okay? So even though that tire, that rubber seems smooth, we get a lot of grip out of it because it is actually very, very rough, okay? Now, another thing that's kind of fun is I have two strings here, okay? Now, these strings look very similar. They are two white strings, okay? But they are out of two different types of materials, okay? So we have two different types of materials on these strings. Now, one is a synthetic material and one is a natural material. So we have a cotton and we have a polyester string, okay? Now, if you need texture, if you need a knot that is going to hold, you would normally want your cotton strings, and we'll show you why. That's because our cotton string, okay, when we look at it under this microscope here, our cotton string, let me scooch this just a tad. There you go. And we'll bring it into focus. There you go. Our cotton string, as you can see, all of those fibers are very random, right? It's very gnarled and knotted together, and that all of those little bumps provide more texture, which provide more friction. Now, you can also see on each little strand that those bumps on there have different varying thicknesses. You can see a little bit of color difference in the cotton That doesn't affect the texture, but it does show us that we've got a lot of different types of fibers in there, and that's what gives us a little bit more friction. Now, in our polyester string, okay, our polyester is going to show us something a little bit different, okay? And when you're looking here, okay, let me dial it in. You're going to see, while we do have some of those fibers that are kind of random there, a lot of them are all going in the same direction, and those fibers are a lot of the same width, okay? So they have the same width, and all of that provides a more smooth or slick surface, so it gives us less friction. Now, this is a fun one that you can do at home. What I have here is hair. Gross, okay? This hair, we have 3 different types of hair. We have a cat at our home, so we have cat hair. I have 3 girls living in my home, so we have their nice slick hair. And then we have my really disgusting beard hair. Okay, so we're going to start with the kitty cat hair, and we're going to pull that one up here. And we're going to show you, if you've ever petted a kitty cat, provided it's fairly clean, the kitty cat is very soft and smooth. Okay, so I'm going to dial that in here. And we can see that our cat hair is very fine, and we can see very uniform lines on that little strand, right? It is very soft, and it is very fine, and it is very smooth on the edges. That's why when you're petting that kitty cat, it is nice and soft and smooth, and then you get those hairs all over you. Now we're going to go to my, I don't know which one of my girls' hair that this is, my wife or one of my 2 daughters, because living in a house with 3 girls, all the hair that's in the vacuum cleaner I don't think is mine. So this hair, I didn't get it out of the vacuum cleaner, that's gross. But this hair here, what we're going to see is that while it is still very smooth, we do have little ridges on there. If you look toward the edges, we have ridges, but you can also tell a human hair versus that animal hair, because a human hair, our lines or our striations in there are actually going with the hair rather than back and forth. With the kitty cat hair, we saw it going back and forth. And you see little bumps on the outside. That's why my girls have wonderfully smooth hair, but not quite as fine as the kitty cat. And then we're going to go over, now don't judge me, okay? I clean my beard, I promise I do, but beard hair is a different type of hair, and it collects oils. As a disclaimer, when you're like, Mr. Dave, you are nasty. This is a clean hair, I promise. But you're going to see how a different texture can hold on to different materials. Now, we'll start at this part of the hair, and then we'll move it around a little bit. Right here, just to begin with, yeah, that's already a nasty looking hair, okay? So we can see all of the bumps on that and the oily spots. Now, I don't have particularly oily skin. I promise I wash my face, but because of the texture of the hair on your face, it grows a lot thicker, and it will have a lot rougher appearance. Now, let's come over here on that same piece of hair, and shamefully, you will be able to see toward the end here that I have a terrible, awful split end on this hair right here. Now, what's happening is we can see that hair breaking down. Find it here. Almost. Okay. Let me see. Let me try and move this thing. I know I got to find it. It's a little tricky on the thing there. Okay, there it is. Now I'm going to dial it in. And there you go. You'll be able to see the nasty end on that hair. Now, see that bump right there? Gross. So what we have going on is that beard hair is nice and bent and crooked and split right there. Don't make fun of me. I don't use enough beard product, I guess. But we can see there that the reason this beard feels a lot rougher is the texture in the hair. Now, I have one more type of hair to show you, or type of fiber to show you. And this fiber here is pretty cool because it is actually the web of a black widow. Now, what I have here is a little bee that we got out of a black widow's web. Now, the black widow was no longer present in the web. We already relocated the black widow. We don't kill them at our house. We relocate them. But this one here, when I show you the back of this bee, you're going to be able to see the fibers on there. Now let me black out the bottom real quick so you can see it a little bit better. But we're going to look at the strands or the fibers on our black widow web, okay? So there's the hair of the bee. Okay, so first we can see that bee hair, so that's a little bit thinner than ours, but it is a nice fine hair. And then I'm going to move it around just a tad here. See if we can find that edge. Yep, and as you can see, we saw how small those bee hair were. This little bitty fibers right here, these little fibers are actually the spider web. The spider web is so fine. And that spider web this little bee is tangled up in that spider web. This one has already been hollowed out by the spider. But you can see the hair of the bee. And there's that bee hair. And then these little bitty fibers are actually that spider web. So that spider web gives the sticky through a chemical process. But it is so fine. And it's actually stronger. It is stronger than our hair. It is stronger tensile strength than steel. Okay, now, one more quick thing I want to show you is when we're talking about roughness, okay, is we think of something right here, and that is sandpaper, okay? So I put some sandpaper under this one here, and we're going to pull this up, and we're going to check out the sandpaper real quick, okay? And so, because when you're thinking of texture, I want you to think of roughness. Now, you can see on here, our sandpaper has got all of that little grit on there, and that is giving us that roughness or that change in texture, okay? Because the amount of texture something has, the more friction it is going to give. Now, sandpaper, of course, is very rough. Our sandpaper is going to give us a lot of friction. It gives us enough friction to scratch things off. Right? So we have sandpaper with lots of friction. That's a fun one. If you don't have a microscope at home, you can go to some of your stores and get just a small magnifying glass, and you can check out some of these items. Okay? But our microscopes, like I said, you can pick up a microscope very inexpensively, and you can look at the roughness of things, or you can just feel them. And you can make some estimates or some hypothesis based on that. Okay, so we're talking about friction. Friction is how things rub together. I'm Mr. Dave, and don't forget, science shows you matter.